And yet, of course, we find women front and center in various conflicts around the continent, Burundi, South Sudan, even Somalia. Dina, yes, we're talking about women as important roles in peacekeeping and peace building and restoration of peace after conflict. How does that happen?
I want to say that women don't start wars, but they definitely are impacted heavily by wars. And so for me, it's important for women to be at the table when discussions are happening regarding peace, because it is us who lose our children, our husband, we can't farm anymore. And so for me, it is very, very important to get women at the table when discussing issues of security and peace.
Indeed, they should be on the table. They don't always start the wars. Sid, war affects, communities greatly. And it is the women who bear the brunt. And by the way, not just of wars and conflict, but also environmental degradation, right?
This is which challenges human evolution across the world. It is not limited to particular societies or communities, but across the world in conflicts, women and children often are targets. Whether it's the First and Second World War, or whether it's been localized conflicts from the Bosnia to anywhere else. Yeah. The tragedy is that we have not seen the shock and awe of justice follow these people who commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. And the grievous crimes against humanity is when they go and hit the soft underbelly of human society, and which is women and children. And when they do that, it makes reconciliation even more difficult. What we are seeing in South Sudan is the rape and pillage of women, UNFPA has a program up in the Kakuma refugee camp for a one-stop sexual and gender-based violence center. It is shocking to see the level of sexual violence that has been brought to bear on these women and kids. What is tragic is that we've not yet been able to empower the systems, though there are international legislations, there are rules, etc., which are there. Yeah. What is tragic is we've not been able to bring to bear. I think there must be robust mechanisms that countries and individuals that commit these horrors, that commit sexual and gender-based violence in these conflicts, and regardless of conflicts, I think should be brought to bear and should face the full face of justice. Justice should pursue them without fear or favor. And the second part is that how do we sensitize armies, militias towards the whole issue of rights and equality? Yeah. And the third and the most important part is the critical interface that happens in a home. In a home, inequality starts there. Yes. Our religions practice inequality, be it Catholicism or Christianity or Hinduism, it all practices. We have to start changing that perspective of culture. I think in Kenya, we are very lucky. We have a First Lady who's really become a champion, a lodestar of women emancipation, of empowerment, driving the whole reproductive and maternal and child health agenda. I think Kenya is at a good place. You have a president who speaks, passionately about it. I think, sitting here with three outstanding women, I'm absolutely confident that Kenya can even become a role model for a country like mine, India, where we are far, far away when it comes to issues of women's equality and women's rights.
All right, interesting, because there was a report that was out a couple of weeks ago, about women who were raped during the post-election crisis, and just talking about how sometimes they end up being the forgotten victims, in this particular instances. Winnie?
Yes, I think let's bring the debate back home, because sometimes when we talk about conflicts, we tend sometimes to think we're talking about the external inter-country conflicts. Yep. Today has been a very great day for Kenya. We had Her Excellency, the Madam Margaret Kenyatta, launch the National Action Plan on Resolution 1325 for Kenya, a milestone in the Kenyan history. So how does Kenya get to look at the conflicts? The Kenyan conflicts mostly are internal. Yeah. And when we talk about the internal conflicts, we see this happening in Tana River, we see this in Samburu, in Turkana. Let's begin to think about who bears the brunt. Yeah. Let's think about the women. For example, I did visit the women when we had the Tana River skirmishes. Yes. And I went to a place called Ozi. And to get to Ozi wasn't easy. I tried by road and it couldn't work. Armed with the policemen, it couldn't work. I had to come back round and now take the boat to go to Ozi. And when I reached Ozi, I found the whole village had been flattened. And I did not meet the women. I met the men who, of course, had turned themselves into warriors. And they told me, Madam, we will respect you. We would want to talk to you, but we do not want to see any armed officer with you. I'm a woman. How would I have made the mistake to go to Ozi without armed guards? So when I got in and I began to negotiate, I asked, can I see the women? Can I see the children? And the men were categorical that, Madam, sorry, we have taken them to the forest to hide them because they were raped, the girls were defiled. And eventually when I got up with some of the women in the camps, it's terrible conditions. The men can afford to be outside the tent, and the tents, we're talking of small things where you have to bend yourself to get in. These mothers have to be in those tents with the children the whole day. Some of the children are very sick. Talking about sanitary. The women don't have sanitary pads. The toilets are not there because they're in a camp within the forest. While the men would give the protection, we are not thinking about the old women, the sick, the people with disabilities that are within those camps. So when you begin to take the resolution 1325 and you're bringing it back home, what we are saying is Kenya now has an action plan. We've identified all the actors who matter in terms of from the grassroots level to the middle level to the executive level.
Right.
What is the role of every Kenyan in this? How do we prevent conflicts? So we have a whole chapter on prevention and what we need to do. We have the peace teams that are within the communities because we know that at the family level, you can end conflict. You can stop conflict. And then we get to the wider level where the Samburus and the Turkanas are fighting every day. How do we intervene? What we are getting is that women can make the change. Intermarriages can bring those changes we need. And so the National Action Plan, which now is out, and I want every Kenyan to go and read it, it tells us how you protect, how you negotiate, how you get to really get to the levels where we prevent
And that
conflicts.
involves also with the security agencies and officials who come in to quell some of these, tensions between the communities, right?
Clearly so, because like the example I was giving you, the Aussie, the community there did believe that the attackers were security personnel.
Right.
And in their view, they are saying, our women were raped by the security personnel. But when I went on the other side, the police are like, they came in to quell the violence because it was just getting out of hand. So clearly, I think when we talk about the conflict, we have two sets of it.
And I think it's important to remind us about the internal ones that we don't
the combatants come in to help, and we have situations where they then become the perpetrators. So how do we deal with this? And for Kenya, I think we are celebrating that our women now are champions. We have women rising up to the higher levels of ranks within the security setup. And I think, while we mourn, because the other day we know Parliament did remove the Kaindi's position. And for me, I have never understood why. We must put women at all levels of our security if we were to get the peace.
And that's an interesting point you bring out. I'll come to you, Dina, in a moment, but let's talk to Gina. Gina, I like that. That works very well on this show, incidentally. We're talking about conflict, but we're also talking about, discrimination against women based on their gender. We're also talking about, sexual exploitation, sexual, at the workplace as well. So talk to us about the private sector and how to deal with that, because that's still a huge issue, isn't it?
I think just the whole sort of fundamental issue, I'm going to throw that right back at you, Yvonne. In the media, how many women are there at very senior levels? So awareness becomes quite it's quite biased. And all the things that Winnie talked about all require awareness. So until we have women in high positions, in editorial positions in the media, we're never going to have the awareness that this
Right.
very important issue.
Right.
is
Even in terms
required.
of raising those stories and putting them, on the top of the agenda. I
So when
agree
you
with
talk about women affected by conflict,
Yeah.
we never hear about those stories. I mean, the KDF soldiers the other day,
Yeah.
what's happened to the wives and the
Wives.
children? I mean, is it forgotten after we had the memorial service? That story just dies. So, I think the whole issue of media is also very critical to the gender.
Absolutely, very important. Thanks for pointing that out. And yes, it is a big challenge, even in the media as well. Thanks for
And
pointing
maybe
that
Yvonne,
out.
just to
Yeah.
really think about where we came from.
Okay.
Today, of course, we were being reminded how the security sector has evolved. In the earlier days, they were not even allowed to marry. The women who served were not allowed to marry, were not allowed to have their children. So clearly, I heard you talking about the sexual reproductive health rights.
Yes.
So we made it so difficult for women to come and occupy these seats. I'm happy as a country we now have long moved, and we have our men and women joining up hands and defending this country.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right. We have someone at the highest level. Yes.
I
the
just wanted
Brigadier
to
last
add that I think education is important and awareness, and I think that probably that resolution should be part of the police people curriculum when they're going through their training. I have had an opportunity to visit police stations when people are arrested, and sometimes if it's women, you find that the gender desk at the police station is just a desk, and they have pictures of different messages, but really it ends at that. So we have to also expand that desk to at least really have tangible effects, positive effects for the women when they're incarcerated.
Right, because Njoki Ndungu had that in her Sexual Offences Act. She's now a Supreme Court justice and, had a gender desk at every police station, especially for women who've been sexually assaulted or raped. And, we've seen a couple of instances where, like you say, it's just a desk, isn't it? Yeah, all right, so a lot more needs to be done.
But
yes, very quickly.
I just want to pick up from there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if education alone is the panacea
Yes.
towards curing this. I just want to go back to an event that UNFPA organized with the religious leaders
Right.
from 15 high burden counties. And I was recounting the other day that, here were scholars, scholars from different parts of Kenya who'd come together. And we'd just done a presentation on the adolescent girl. And there was this absolutely learned Muslim scholar who got up and said, I disagree with what you just said, that a girl below 18 should not be married, because the Prophet married at the age of 6 and consummated the marriage at the age of 9. What I realized when I saw this scholar was he spoke impeccable English. There was no deficiency in education.
Right.
But it is, I wonder if education really emancipates us from deeply held prejudices.
Great.
And that's the issue. That policeman also
Yeah.
was a child at one point. We didn't import the policeman
Yes.
from Mars.
Indeed.
And I think that is where it needs to start, at the home level.
At the home level.